This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. After experiencing trauma, I went to therapy, and my therapist guided me through a difficult time in my life. They helped me understand what was happening and provided me with tools to cope and find my own strength and resilience. Their experience and compassion were invaluable and enabled me to rebuild my life and move forward. I strongly believe in the power of therapy to help people through difficult times. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and give you helpful, unbiased advice. First, you go to their site. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/resilience. You answer a few questions, and BetterHelp will match you to a professional who has years of experience helping people with struggles just like yours. Let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you, all from the comfort of your own home. Visit betterhelp.com/resilience or choose podcast, then Notes on Resilience during sign up and enjoy a special discount on your first month. Hello, welcome to Notes on Resilience. I'm your host, Manya Chilinsky, and our guest today is Kyla Cofer. She's a transformational leadership coach and host of the podcast, The Leadership School. We had a fabulous conversation about her values, what is burnout, and how do you prevent burnout, and how do you even know that you are feeling burnt out? We talk about boundaries and answering the question, am I well? I hope you enjoy the conversation. Hello, Kyla, welcome.
Hi, Manya. So nice to be here with you. And I know you have something else to say, but I'm going to interrupt and just say that you pronounced my name correctly. And I just had this moment of like, we really are friends because most people don't. So thanks for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm so glad. Before we get into who are you and why are we talking today, I would like to ask you, if you could have any superpower, what would it be?
To pick and choose when I know what other people are thinking, what they're actually thinking. Because there are so many times.
I like that, to pick and choose.
Yeah, because I don't want to hear everybody's thoughts all the time. But there are a lot of times when I assume people are thinking something and they're not actually thinking that. So like I'm married. And so this happens a lot in marriage when I'm like, well, you just think that I'm like this. And he's like, I never thought that at all. Like, where are you? I never said that, So like, I want to know what people actually think, but in the moments when I need to know it. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I love it. I'm going to add that to my superpower to-do list. Wow. Thank you for sharing. And can you just tell us your story? Like, who are you? What do you do? And how are you in a place to be thinking about resilience or compassion or trauma?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a transformational leadership coach, aka life coach. I'm a podcaster. I have my own podcast called Leadership School, which you've been a guest on. And I am a keynote speaker. I speak about burnout, healing and prevention, about failure, and about self-worth. So where that all stems from is I have a lifelong history of anxiety, depression, and low self-worth and a lot of self-doubt, mental illness, really. And so it's just through my own journey of transformation and trying to understand myself and trying to live a life where I'm like happy and have joy. I've struggled quite a bit. And I have had moments when I've done something like ridiculous that's not a big deal, and I'll just beat myself up over it. And so I've had to go through this process of learning what it means to really love myself and have compassion for myself. I grew up as a conservative Christian, and while I no longer practice it at all, the thoughts that I had growing up, a lot of those were kind of challenging for me. But one was always love your neighbor as yourself. And I don't know that that's not like unique to conservative Christianity, but this idea of love your neighbor as yourself often came into my life as in, you need to love everybody more than you love yourself, and you need to love everybody else, but not yourself. And I eventually learned that if I'm going to love people the way I love myself, and I'm loving myself terribly, like what kind of love are other people really getting? They're not getting anything from me. And so I had to start shifting my mind to really loving myself first and letting that overflow out of me to other people. So through that process, I've now gone into life coaching and all these things. And now I take all these practices that I've learned through my own education, my coaching practice, and share them with other people.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. It's so interesting that you said, love your neighbor as yourself and kind of interpreted it as loving other people more than loving yourself. Self-compassion can be one of those really sticky things that's hard for us to find.
I was actually taught to do it that way too. Like we called it the joy rule. You put Jesus first, others second, then yourself last. So it was like ingrained in my brain, and my middle name was Joy. And so I was like, oh yeah, this is my rule, right? I'm going to love other people. And I did, I loved other people well, I think, but I don't really know how well that love was, because it was always with negativity toward myself. So in changing that, I've truly changed my life.
Yeah. And that's so amazing. And I, as your friend, am glad that you were able to make that change. So you have heard me talk about resiliency, and that's the title of this podcast. And you know that it is not always my favorite word, but I'm curious, what do you think about the word resiliency?
Okay, so I know you're going to ask me about this, and for like 3 weeks now, I've been meaning to look up the word so I could actually have the definition, and I never got around to it. So because I have like two different ideas of what resiliency means, and I don't know how they compare to the actual definition. So the one idea of resilience is like, kids are so resilient. Like you can have something happen to you, you can move in the middle of third grade and bounce right back. Just that term of like something crazy might happen to you and you can just go on with your life like nothing happened, right? But I've been thinking more and more about the version of resiliency that really just means like how competent, capable, and qualified you are to do something with ease. So like playing the piano, I'm a piano player. I don't play as much as I used to, but to sit down and play a song on the piano, when you're first learning, you're like trying to tap the notes. Like you don't even know where they are. Your hands can't really reach the keys. It's not natural. It feels really weird. Well, then you play that same song 1,000 times or different notes. Your hands are all over that keyboard. You're getting more familiar with it. The songs get harder as you go. And pretty soon you can sit down and just play. And you don't have to think about it. To me, that's another version of resiliency. It's when things come so easy to you and naturally to you that you don't have to think about them, and that you're very competent in whatever that thing is. Does that make sense?
Yes, that completely.
So I have those like two contrasting definitions going on in my mind of, am I resilient in that like whatever this goal or task that I'm trying to do, like being a life coach, being a speaker, being able to go up on stage and speak to whatever from 50 to 1,000 people or more and not stress about my talk, like be comfortable on stage, that kind of thing, versus like a new speaker where I'm like, I'm nervous and what if I forget my lines and I don't know how to interact with the audience and all that kind of stuff. So getting to that level of resiliency, or the definition of resilience, like being able to bounce up and continue on with your life as normal. I would love to hear kind of what your takes are on it. A word that you've thought about quite a bit.
Yes, it is a word I've thought about quite a bit. I tend to think of it more on the personal level as that ability to bounce back when something happens, whatever that thing may be, that you're able to bounce back. And I visualize that a lot like a young tree with supple limbs that bend in the wind rather than break in the wind. So they get pushed to the ground, they get pushed out of the way, and when the wind's done, they just pop right back up and the tree is happily a tree again. So when I'm thinking about personal resiliency, that's what I think of. But as you know, I often think about resiliency in terms of the roles of our systems, our institutions, in helping people bounce back from adverse events or to heal from a trauma. And I'm curious, have you ever thought about resiliency in that respect, or what do you think about resiliency when you think about the role of our systems?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I used to be on the board of a nonprofit for homeless outreach. And I'm, growing up in the church, the Christian church, there's a lot of nonprofits, a lot of churches, communities, and then of course, government organizations. And It's hard because I think that we put a lot of hope and responsibility on our systems. And we need them because some people aren't capable and don't have the abilities and don't have the access to doing that personal resilience work and needing support in other ways. And I think the challenge is we can never put so much trust and faith and hope in one particular institution because they're always going to fail us and let us down in some way. We kind of have to use support and resources from multiple different areas. And if we have the ability to take charge of our own selves in a way and lean more on that personal resiliency, yeah. But we also have to go look for those resources, like the systems don't come searching for you necessarily. And I mean, sometimes they do. Like when I was on the board of the homeless outreach, we went and searched for people who lived on the streets. Like you looked for that, but you're always going to be let down in some way because they're imperfect humans who are also dealing with their own personal resiliency issues who are running these systems. And it's not like a machine or a computer or a robot that just like functions. So I think we put a lot of trust and faith and hope in things and then get let down a lot. And then when we're let down, then that's when another nonprofit pops up to fill in the gap, and a church community will come up to fill up the next gap. And like we have a lot of overlap, I think, from a lot of different organizations, sometimes doing the same things, but just doing it in their own unique different ways.
Do you think, you mentioned that you think, our systems and our institutions in some ways are always going to let us down, because certainly not any one organization or institution can do everything. But do you think that there's hope that we can change the system so that maybe fewer of these institutions or organizations let us down? I'm just curious because it sounded a little fatalistic.
It did, didn't it? I do think there's hope. And I think everything needs to exist, right? I think that there's a purpose for every institution, nonprofit, community, like that they have a purpose and they have a responsibility. And I think that wherever something exists, there's always hope. I mean, one of my top value is hope, that I really believe that there's hope everywhere and in everything. And so if we're hoping for some kind of change in something, the hope is that it would happen immediately. And we just have to understand that hope is long-term. That hope isn't something that we're like, oh, I just see this thing that needs to happen. And so by tomorrow, because I had the idea, it's going to be different. Like we have this idea and then we're disappointed when it doesn't work out, or we're like, they failed me again, But hope doesn't just happen. It takes effort. It takes pursuit. It takes consistency. It takes time. And like I said, it's a long-term thing. So I think that I'm so grateful that there are institutions, that there are people, that there are services, systems, communities, that there's organizations that really do seek to help people. And I really believe that they are making a difference in small ways. But if we are needing more support and more resources, we can't just expect somebody else to anticipate that need and take care of it.
Right. Oh, thank you. That makes sense. Absolutely. You work with leaders and you see things like burnout and other struggles that leaders are facing as they are working in these institutions, in these organizations that we're talking about. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with your clients in terms of burnout and burnout prevention, and how are you working with them to kind of get over that hump?
A lot of it is some of the things that I kind of mentioned already, that if somebody has the capability, the ability, and the resources, those are the people that I'm spending time with. And when I say resources, I mean time, money, mental health, and well-being to be able to work towards more health. So if you are in a place where you have experienced a trauma, you are so burnt out that you're having physical symptoms and you're becoming physically ill from burnout, I am not the person you want to come to. First, you need to deal with those issues. Right? Those are health issues. That's medical issue. That's a therapy issue. And I'm not a certified therapist. I don't do that. So I am talking about people who are either not quite at that level or who are coming up out of that, and are wanting to pursue some more goals. So I'm looking at okay, if our goal is health and well-being and wellness, what habits do you need to put in place to work towards that? And how can I help you and support you in building, creating those habits and working and pushing towards those goals, you know? So we talk a lot about connection. How do we incorporate more connection in our lives, and connection internally and externally, like internally being reconnecting with who you are and what your own needs. And that includes setting boundaries. So it's a lot of boundary conversations. What are boundaries? How do we actually implement them? How do we follow them? How do we feel safe setting boundaries? And then how do we just actually do it? And sometimes this is really hard, especially like in a work environment or a nonprofit that doesn't have a lot of resources. Setting boundaries can feel really challenging because, you know, you have great goals and great ambitions without a lot of resources to put into them. And so people are just expending of themselves. But this goes a lot back to what I was saying earlier about love your neighbor as you love yourself. You know, if you don't have the resources and you're not caring for yourself, you don't have what you need to really give to other people. So when you're in those systems and you're the people who are leading those systems, you have to do your own personal development work and you have to care for yourself and your own well-being. And if you don't do those things, like Arianna Huffington says, if you don't have health and well-being, like what do you have? What else do you have? You limit your capacity to give and to be kind. So it's a lot of really just encouraging leaders and giving them confidence that they are capable of investing in themselves and their own well-being, and that priority has to come first. And sometimes that can be hard, especially if you've spent a lifetime not doing that.
Yes, it's a skill that you have to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to just take a step back. I mentioned burnout and burnout prevention, but I didn't ask you, what is burnout? What does it look like if someone's experiencing burnout?
Sure. So burnout is the medical definition of burnout, and it is a medical diagnosis now. It's the mental, emotional, physical exhaustion from overwork or stress. So if you think about like all the different parts of the human body, you're a spiritual person in a physical, like you can touch it, you can feel it, see it, body. You have a mind with thoughts, a soul, emotions. You just put that all together, and burnout is what affects all of those things. So it's the mental, the emotional, and the physical exhaustion. And this means completely depleted. It's not like being the tired at the end of a long day. It's the end of a line of long days, of constantly overworking, constantly being overstressed. And then it starts to break down your body and your mind.
Okay. How do people recognize when they've reached that point? Or is it possible for someone to recognize it? Does it have to come from outside?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. A lot of times it does come from the outside. Like I've got a buddy who went to the hospital with a lot of heart pain and like palpitations. Is that word? Heart palpitations. He was like, his heart was really having a rough time. So he went to the ER and they were like, your heart's healthy and fine, but if you don't cut back on the work that you're doing, we'll see you in here in 3 weeks with a heart attack.
Wow.
So it came from the outside for him when he was like, oh, so sometimes we don't notice it because we're just like, I have to keep going, right? This happens a lot in like caregivers who are caring full time for somebody who's disabled, or I guess that's it. If you're caring for somebody who's got some sort of a disability or an illness and you're full-time caregiving for them without getting some respite and without getting some relief and some support and resources, you will be burnt out because you can't do that 24 hours a day. It's not sustainable. And if you've been sustaining it for a really long time, then my encouragement would be to get some support, because if you get so burnt out, you won't be able to care for that person anymore because you will not be healthy, So a lot of times people can notice it in themselves when you're like, I'm so stressed all the time. I can't stop crying. I'm angry. Your irritability, like if you start getting really irritated, your hair might start falling out in like chunks. And you're like, why is my hair? Every time I wash my hair, I have like handfuls of hair. Long people, if you have long hair, that might happen generally anyway, but like if it's more than normal, you might notice that. The irritability though, and the anxiety, the inability to like really make decisions when you're struggling in decision making, you're fatigued, all of those things. So burnout can be hard because you might think it could be something else. Oh, well, I just haven't eaten, or I'm not getting enough sleep. Well, but like you have to kind of go through the checklist of things and just start asking yourself, am I well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Am I well? And I wonder how any of us can answer that at any given time, right? Just given all the difficulty life can present itself.
That's the thing. Yeah. Like we have, if you if you rate your well-being on a scale of 1 to 10, and you can break this out around the circle of well-being, or the circle of whatever, when you think about all the different areas of your life, from finances to physical health, mental health, friendships, relationships, career, all those things. And you can break those down and do scales of 1 to 10 from each of those things. But if you think of your overall well-being, how are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And answer that question honestly. 1 is like, to be honest, I don't know how I'm still existing, how I'm not I should be in the hospital. 10 being like, my life is absolutely perfect. The amount of time that we will spend in our lives at a 10 is quite small.
Yeah.
We're not going to always be at a 10 in our life. And it's hard because sometimes we feel like, especially for a perfectionist like myself, you feel like you should always be at that 10. Like if you're not at that 10, then something's wrong. You're not succeeding, you're a failure, whatever, but that's not how life works. We shouldn't always be at a 10. That's truthfully unsustainable. Our life is meant to ebb and flow. There's ups and downs, and it's waves. It's, like the ocean. You're just got these bumps, and it's going, and you're at a steady pace. But if you're in a sail, like we're sailors here in our family, and if you're in a sailboat, the boat might heel, so it's going to turn to its side. And that's okay. It feels really scary because you're tipped on the boat and you're going, but the boat is meant to do that. It's meant to tip, and then it'll right itself as it goes down the next wave, and it'll tip the other way. And when you're turning, you're gonna heel, but it's meant to do that. And that's how our lives are. We're meant to like ebb and flow, go back and forth. But if you're dipping from like a 2 to a 9 to a 2 to a 7 to a 5, like if you're doing these ups and downs dips, like that's something more serious to consider. But don't expect that my whole life, if I'm not at a 10, then I'm not having well-being. Like that's not true. But if you're always at a 2, then you probably aren't having well-being.
Right. What's your top 1 or 2 tips for people who are trying to manage that back and forth, and maybe not a 2 to a 10, but a 4 to a 7, or and feeling uncomfortable about those kind of shifts that we all go through? What's your advice on how somebody can manage that and, take care of themselves?
Yeah. My number 1 tip is to focus on connection. It's impossible to have well-being without connection. So I know I mentioned this earlier about your internal connections, really connecting with who you are, taking moments, whether that's through breathing practices like breath work, doing yoga, doing meditation, doing reading, writing, journaling, art, music, sports, grilling, barbecuing, whatever that is for you. Like you've got to start being intentional about connecting to the soul of who you are. And that looks different for everybody. Somebody asked me, well, what's the most common thing? Like the most common thing is the one that works for you.
Yeah.
It's going to be different for every human, but you've got to be intentional about doing those things every single day. And it doesn't have to mean that you have to spend 3 hours. You don't have to go to the gym for like 3 hours. Or you could go read a chapter in a book, or you could go for a 5-minute walk. Just little things that are reconnecting to yourself. So that's my number 1 tip. And then obviously connecting to other people, like making sure that's in your life too. That's different levels for introverts and extroverts, but different for that. But then the other thing is just boundaries. That means boundaries with yourself, boundaries with other people. So learning truly what that means, and really giving yourself enough compassion to set that up in your life, and to say no to yourself, say no to people, and say yes to yourself, and say yes to other people. Like boundary also means saying yes to things.
Yes, it does, right? I think we tend to think of boundaries as meaning we have to say no to everybody, but it is also saying yes to ourselves when we're creating a boundary.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about boundaries in particular in terms of this kind of conversation, but it's so clear when you're talking about it.
Oh, well, good. I hope so. I mean, boundaries take a long time to learn. I had never heard the word boundaries until I was in college. Never even heard the word. So I've had to, as an adult, learn what they are. And it gets really confusing sometimes because you think like a boundary means I'm going to tell this person that they have to not act like that in front of me. But that is not a boundary. The boundary is that you can tell the person that you're welcome to act however you want. That's on you. You can say whatever you want. But if you do that, I'm going to have to leave the room. So like I'm allergic to cigarette smoke. So if someone wants to smoke, that's their decision. But if you're going to smoke, I'm going to leave. That's my boundary. And I can warn them about that. I can let them know so that they're not surprised when I've just like walked mid conversation, like whatever that is, you can tell somebody, and you don't have to be mean about it, but it also gives people a chance to open up and get to know you better. Like they wouldn't know that I'm allergic to smoke or the smell of smoke unless I've told them. Right.
Right. Okay. So, in your work with leadership and thinking about burnout prevention and self-care, what is an important lesson that you feel like you've learned about resilience or about compassion, maybe, that you've learned because of your work?
The only thing that's coming to my mind is that you are enough. Like that's the only phrase. It's not, nothing else will pop into my mind right now other than the phrase, you are enough. That everything that you are, everything that you're doing, everything that you want to do is enough. And it's just fine and just perfect. And there's no there's no limit of what you can do. And you can do all the things that you want to do, but you don't have to be something that you're not. You don't have to be more than you are. You are enough to do everything that you dream of. And I was afraid of pursuing things for so long. And I see people being really struggling to make decisions for their own health and well-being because they feel like they need something else. They're waiting on something till the moment is right, till I have the things in place, the resources in place. But you have everything that you need in front of you. You already have it. Mm-hmm. And you really have to learn to believe that and accept it, that you have what you need. You are enough to get through this moment, whatever it is. And life is going to hand us a lot of things. And as we grow older, we'll experience a lot more grief and we're a lot more, the world, ups and downs of the world and all of these things that you can't avoid, when you're 12 and you're running around the backyard. And typically we don't think about all the worries that life has to offer unless you're in a community environment that is already experiencing a lot of those traumas. But even then, like we always have the resources within ourselves that we need. I really believe that. And I think that it takes accepting who we are and allowing ourselves to exist as we are and giving ourselves our own compassion to open up and to really truly be that person and accept that we are enough just as we are. And all of this stuff that the world brings to us and comes at us, we have what we need to get through it, even though it might be hard and doesn't necessarily mean that we'll get over it, that it'll be like a memory or it's something that we just block out. It's disappeared. It's over and gone like cotton candy on your tongue. It's not like that. It's that we have what we need to be amazing through it and in spite of it and with all of those things that are happening.
Yes. And as you're talking about saying that you are enough, I am enough, you are enough, that makes me think a little bit about the concept of control. So as I'm a trauma survivor, and one of the things that trauma can do is take away one's sense of control. And when you don't feel that you have any control, at least speaking for myself, you don't feel like you're enough or that you even know how to do it. But looking back, I see, well, I was enough. I did get myself through this. But, in those moments when someone is struggling with not feeling in control for whatever reason, maybe they're traumatized or they just aren't feeling like they're enough, what are some ways we can remind ourselves that we are enough and we are resilient and we are doing the things we need to do to survive?
I think that's when the other part of connection comes in. The external connections, other people, because you might need people to remind you of that. And there's a really amazing organization here in Nashville, Tennessee called Thistle Farms, and it provides free housing and resources and services to women who are coming out of drugs and prostitution for 2 full years. They kind of go through this program, and they will often tell the women, we will love you until you learn to love yourself. We will provide that love for you until you have it for yourself. And when you've come in spaces like that, there is so much trauma. And for these women who are coming into that, their life is like trauma after trauma all day long. And it takes a long time to heal. And you've got to have other people You have to. You've got to, until you can take those messages for yourself, you have to be able to take them from other people. So that means that if your hope is healing, to be a happy, healthy, whole person, if your hope is that resiliency to move through and out of something, you have to put yourself around the people who can help you through that. So if you're going to continue putting yourself around the abusive ex-boyfriend, you're going to stay in that same cycle. But if you start to put yourself around the people who are going to say, I will love you fully and wholly until you learn to love yourself, those are the people that you want to be around. The people who are inspiring you, supporting you. And if you don't have those people, if you can't find them, I mean, that's where podcasts come in. That's where books come in. You can find mentors and heroes through people that you haven't met before. Some of the people that have really inspired me most are, these podcasters that I've never met, who have no clue I even exist, but I've been so inspired by them. Or I was just watching a TV show last night. It was just a character on the TV show, right? But there was this moment in the show that I have watched dozens of times. I have literally watched the same episode so many times because of this one moment that just draws me in every single time. And we can find that hope and that inspiration from other places, but we have to also take a little bit of a responsibility to know about what you want for yourself. You don't have to say, I have to get through this and I'm going to get through it on my own. You just have to say, I have hope that there will be a lighter day and a brighter day. And I'm going to surround myself with the people who can show me where that is.
Oh, I like that. And I like your noting that it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that we personally know. It can be, a podcaster. It can be a character on TV. It can be an author. I have to say that I had this period after my trauma where I was all about the inspirational quotes. Like, I would read one of these inspirational quotes, whether it was from somebody a long time ago or somebody who's currently around, and I would read these quotes and I just would think, yes, this, it's doable. I can do this. And I took so much power from them. And I hadn't even remembered that until you just said this.
Wow.
That
it's finding those like little comforts and little moments every day, like to get you through that day, to get you to the next day. And it's like you're building strength, just like at the gym, right? I love this example. You don't go to the gym for the first time after never having been there in 10 years and be like, I lifted weights once. Look at all these muscles. You're going to go day one. And you're going to kind of be in pain and it's going to be hard. Then you go on day two and it's this slow build up and you get stronger and stronger and stronger along the way until a point where you're like, I don't even know where this strength came from. Well, you do know. It's because of the everyday work that you put in. And it's the same thing with recovering from trauma, recovering from burnout, recovering from, community that I grew up in where it was put everybody else first and you just don't matter, whatever that is. It's not like you can walk through a door, close it, and then the rest of the life is all okay and it's all back behind that door and you've left it all there. That's not how it works. It's you walk through that door and then you walk through the next one and you walk through 1,000 till you've gone through the hallway.
Yes. I like that metaphor a lot. I think a lot of us have experiences where we wish we could just close the door, lock it, put a bar across it, and pretend it never existed. But as we know, that doesn't really work.
Oh, man. So many times. I can't tell you how many days I've been frustrated in my life. I'm like, I thought I walked through this already. There it is. Just comes bubbling up. It's like your personality, right? You get the color of your hair, the roots always come out,
Yes.
right? Like, it's always going to be there because you are you and you are enough.
Yes.
And life happens on these everyday moments, and it might not be okay today, and that's okay. And it might not be okay tomorrow, and that's okay. And someday, 10 years from now, you're still going to feel something will trigger you and you'll go, I remember that moment and how hard it was. And that moment, it might not be okay, but you will have days when you are okay and you're able to experience joy.
Yes. And speaking of inspirational quotes, it reminds me of one that I come back to often, which is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today.
Yeah.
I just love that. So, we talked a little bit earlier about the role of organizations in helping people with in supporting people's resiliency or in having compassion towards individuals. And I know that this is something that we each need to be focused on for ourselves, and we can't necessarily rely on our organizations. But I'm going to ask you this question anyway, which is, what is the most important action or policy that an organization can take to be really supportive of people in their resiliency and to be truly compassionate?
Ask them. I think to just ask the people you're serving. I think we often make decisions because of what we think people need and what they think they want and what we think would help them. But we need to ask. How many government policies have been created, education system, when we're like the teachers or whoever that the policy's been created for is like, we don't actually need this or want this. It's not quite right. But if you are able to actually ask the people that it's affecting what they need and what would help them most, you'll get a much better perspective on how actually you can serve.
Yeah, that's a good reminder to ask the people that you serve. And I think that's an answer to a lot of questions. Actually speak to the people that you're trying to serve. So we are getting close to the end of our time, and you know that I could speak to you for another 5 days on these topics, but our podcast listeners have other things to do, so we're going to start to wrap up. But is there a question that you wish I had asked you, but I did not ask?
That used to be like my favorite question to ask people. I would always ask them, what's something you wish people knew about you, but they don't? So I don't know. I like asking those types of questions. Yeah, no, I don't. I think that we covered a lot of different topics. So I think that we covered it all. I don't have anything else really. Okay. I think that I would love, if these topics are interesting to you, and you're interested in growing, just take a listen to the Leadership School podcast, where we talk a lot about some of these things, and we talk about different areas of leadership from leaders from around the world. And so I just want to tell people to go take a listen to that if that's interesting. And that's kind of all I've got left to say.
All right. Well, that's not all you have left to say, because I have one more question for you. Okay. Which is, what would you tell your 18-year-old self about compassion or resiliency?
I would really just say, start having compassion for yourself. Start seeing yourself differently and have that compassion for you and who you are, because it was around 18 when I just really plummeted with the negative self-talk and the negative beliefs, and that my self-worth just plummeted. And I think I just want to say, have compassion with your experiences, where you've been, who you are, the things in your life, and just keep going and you'll be fine.
I love it. I love it. So now you have mentioned your podcast, The Leadership School, and we are going to put a link in the show notes. But how else can listeners reach you if they want to learn more about you?
That's really the best way, is leadershipschoolpodcast.com. But you can look at my website. It's kylacofer.com, and that'll be in the show notes, I'm sure. And those are the best 2 ways to reach out to me. I guess I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. I'm on all the places. So you can just look for me, and I would love to connect with you and chat with you more about doing workshops, trainings, or coaching, or having you as a guest on my podcast.
Oh, that's wonderful. Kyla, thank you so much for your time today. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you to our listeners for sitting in on this conversation. And we will talk soon.
Thank you so much, Manya. Always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I did. So if you'd like to learn more about me, Manya Chilinsky, I work with organizations to help understand how to create environments where people can thrive after difficult life experiences. And I do this through talks and consulting. I'm a survivor of mass violence, and I use my experience to help leaders learn about resiliency, compassion, and trauma-sensitive leadership, to build strategies to enable teams to thrive and be engaged amidst difficulty and turmoil. If this is something you want to learn more about, visit my website, www.manyachilinsky.com, or email me at manya@manyachilinsky, or stop by my social media on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks so much.